I always tell my parents that if I ever saw a famous movie director, I would run up to them and give them my pitch. And you're probably wondering why. Well, I think I have the next best movie idea because the story has it all. Conflict, romance, a wise mentor, inspiring moments, and protagonists to advocate for. So the story follows a civil war in Sri Lanka. And in this war, there's a boy whose father is killed when he's only 20. So he has to take on the role of being a family protector, working tirelessly to attend school amidst the war. He would wake up early to wait in line for limited supplies of food, scramble into bunkers during airstrikes, and even once, while traveling, was taken off his bus and held at gunpoint. In this chaos, he also met a woman who had her own terrifying experiences, like hiding in a hospital bathroom for hours and walking out to find bodies around her. Eventually, their paths intertwined, and they even fled together in the middle of the night where their car broke down, but they were saved by the people fleeing alongside them. Amidst this, a hero with no obligation to help also stepped up to care for this boy and his siblings. He shielded this family with kindness, serving as a pillar of strength through loss and demonstrating resilience, sacrifice, and profound empathy. Now, I can't take credit for this story in any way. It was told to me and based on real-life events, because this boy is my dad, the woman, my mom. And this is the story of how they grew up and survived a civil war. In fact, my entire family can relate to this story, from my aunts and uncles to my grandparents. And even though my dad told me the story in the most dad way possible, just so nonchalant and chill, I'm sure you can imagine the series of emotions I went through hearing this story. It really allowed me to connect with the pain that my family experienced throughout their lives. Empathy is this ability to understand and share the feelings of another. And it's a total understatement to say that this story completely changed my life regarding how I perceived empathy. Because, see, I've known my family my whole life, but growing up, I had little insight into their struggles. After learning more, though, I finally started to see them as people, beyond their roles as just parents and aunts and uncles and grandparents. Hearing their story helped me access a deep sense of compassion for them and other survivors, a depth of emotions I hadn't really accessed before. And of course, I've heard stories about the war and its impact on various people, but I had never fully felt this level of sensitivity toward its impact. This made me face an uncomfortable realization. My empathy has often been conditional, triggered only by personal relevance. Only after learning about my family's history did I access that depth of emotions, which was humbling and disappointing. And I think we've all felt that way. Maybe you knew about someone else's loved one who was struggling with the disease, but you didn't fully grasp the impact of this if you didn't know someone with that disease. Or maybe you were reading about a catastrophic incident, but the number of, say, 6 people didn't really stick with you because it's just a number. Or maybe you were non-empathetic to a person's mistake, blaming them instead of a circumstance, even if you would have done the opposite had it been you in that position. After my reflections with my dad, I suddenly couldn't understand how so many people could just passively listen to news about wars when I had done the same for so long before hearing my family's story. Why didn't people care enough? Well, the truth is, we as humans don't care enough because we don't know how to. Standing up here, it's still humbling to admit that I hadn't understood empathy's depth for so long, but I wanted to share this story because I think it's something that we all struggle with, and that doesn't make most of us imperfect unless we act like that isn't true. Regardless, we must challenge our tendency for empathy to fall short so we can actually work together to create a more compassionate and understanding world. Now, when I think about why a lot of people tend to struggle with empathy, especially for people and places we have no connection to, I really like the ideas of Paul Bloom. And Bloom describes empathy as a spotlight, directing attention where it's needed when we need to. He explains, though, that this mindset is a problem because it doesn't work in a world where there are so many people in need. In fact, Bloom's ideas point out a really crucial shortcoming that comes with empathy. we like to practice empathy when told to. We focus on narrow conversations, narratives, stories, and context, and we put our energy into that. And while this practice isn't bad, it's limited, and it restricts us to a world where we're often unable to see beyond our own lives. So these ideas started to get me thinking, well, how can we actually work together to create a more active practice of empathy? This led to my creation of a working model of empathy following the acronym USE, which I put in place to encourage us to use empathy instead of just assuming that we get it. So let's go ahead and break the model down, starting with the U, which I put in place for understanding context. And this might feel like something we already know because one of the first things a lot of us are taught when it comes to practicing empathy is to demonstrate an understanding for others. But I want to challenge our typical ideas of what it means to be genuinely understanding. So I'm sure a lot of us have heard that saying, imagine how you would feel in their shoes, as a way to empathize with what someone else is feeling. But notice that when we say this, we're still putting ourselves into their position, even though we know little about how we would react in this particular circumstance, and more importantly, how that compares to this other person's response. Because the truth is, two people can live the exact same life to every detail and still react and respond entirely differently to the same situation. So a better way I like to think about this is to instead ask yourself, how would I feel within the context of what they are experiencing, and how might I learn from that to better understand them in their specific circumstance? And I know this is a much longer statement to remember, but like people always say, context is key. And one of the ways to gain this genuine understanding is to be able to connect with the context in which a person might be experiencing some form of pain or inequity. And ask yourself, how would you feel? How would you react? What can you learn from this imagination that can help inform you what it could feel like to be in their position? Take these questions and turn this into your framework for listening to others' stories. You can help minimize the assumptions you make about their exact experience while still understanding their surroundings. And while you may initially know a little bit less about their exact feelings and emotions, that's precisely the point. Because rather than put yourself into their shoes, you're putting yourself into your own shoes right next to them. So you're in a place of better understanding the world that surrounds them, while still giving this person the chance to speak to their exact feelings and emotions that you can then empathize with. Okay, we're going to talk about the next part of the model, which is S, for statistical uniqueness consideration. Now, it's no secret that humans are generally non-empathetic to numbers and statistics. While they can guide us and help us contextualize the magnitude of things, they're not really things we like to gravitate toward with emotion. And this makes sense because the human brain naturally likes to connect with experiences, faces, and stories more than a number. In fact, a study exploring empathy through data describes this really well, saying that humans tend to relate more to the reality of one individual. So because of this, when we see, for example, the number of deaths increase in a situation, our emotional association tends to go down. They further explain that this lack of empathy is due to an inability of our minds to process two or more people simultaneously. And these findings were even quantitatively supported in a study in judgment and decision-making, which found that as the number of victims increase in a particular event, our emotional contributions tend to go down. Ultimately, when we look at abundances of data, we tend to minimize our desire to pursue action, even if that action is just being compassionate. Now, this instinctive lack of empathy for numbers is actually something that I've had experience with. For example, I've always known some facts about the Sri Lankan Civil War, including that the UN estimated that between 80,000 to 100,000 people died, with the U.S. Department of State further estimating that nearly 1 million people were displaced because of this civil war. Now, hearing these numbers was jarring, but again, not complete empathy. Only after learning about how my family members became a part of both of these statistics was when I started to grasp this idea of statistical uniqueness. That in every single number you hear, there is an entire complexity of life that existed for someone that is no longer continued. Each of these people had favorite foods, fears, dreams, and even just things they found funny. Imagine that each number you hear is an accumulation of every life experience, emotion, or thought you have ever had. Every single number you hear is unique in that way. Considering this, the magnitude of these statistics then increases immensely, doesn't it? Now, I'm not asking you to go research every data point and every story belonging to every statistic ever. What I encourage you to do, however, is to internalize this reflection, because this instinctive lack of empathy for numbers and statistics is a bias that we must actively challenge in our minds. Spend the time to sit with the data and humanize it in a way that reminds you that every single number you hear is worth a million experiences of just one person with the world. Remind yourself that each number has so many stories attached to it that you would very likely be able to empathize with if these people only had the opportunity to share them. By taking the time to actually understand statistical uniqueness, you'll better be able to practice empathy for people and places you have no connection to, helping us extend our empathy across the world. Okay, we've reached the last part of the model, which is E, for emotional regulation, and this part of the model is all about self-care. I spent a lot of time today talking about how we should be making more critical and active engagements with empathy. But I also understand that this isn't something that can be on at all times. Life is relative and complex, and we all need something entirely different to best manage our emotions, stress, and consequently, our ability to be empathetic. In fact, a study in effective science has shown that increased emotional regulation improves our empathetic engagement because we're less likely to be overwhelmed in those conversations requiring compassion due to our improved ability to manage personal emotional responses. Emotional regulation is absolutely vital to our ability to be empathetic in an understanding manner because we can't carry the world's weight if we don't have the strength to manage our own emotions too. By taking the time to actually contextualize your emotions within the context of your own life, you'll better be able to extend empathy for others when it's needed. It's also important to note that emotional regulation in a way that best suits your needs is an act of self-care. So what works for someone else might not work for you, and that's totally okay. It just means that we have to do what works best for us. The key to this consideration, though, for everyone, is for it to happen in advance and as a preventative measure. By identifying your regulating strategies early, you'll better be able to navigate your personal emotional responses in times where compassion is not immediately required. When you're engaging in self-care, you are creating a capacity to be compassionate. Because of this, emotional regulation is not something that's selfish, but it's actually a way to be empathetic. Okay, so that is my entire working model of empathy following the acronym USE. Understand context, statistical uniqueness consideration, and emotional regulation. And this model is definitely not perfect and certainly not the only thing that you should consider when moving throughout your life. But implementing this practice into your daily lifestyle can help you take a significant first step towards becoming a more empathetic and understanding person. And this model is broad, but I want to encourage you to think about how that's precisely the point. Because some of you might be able to relate to my story and others may have no connection to what I'm saying at all. But you probably have your own examples you can pull from with friends, family, coworkers, and the world around you. Just because our experiences are different doesn't mean that we can't learn from one another. So this model is broad so that it's something that we can all do and it encompasses the lives of everyone. So next time you're practicing empathy, I encourage you to think about this model, whether it be in a situation where you are trying to handle yourself better, or when you find yourself not using compassion at all. Experiences I'm sure we've all had. I also encourage you to start implementing this model with everything you see in your life, not just when the opportunity arises. Start to implement this model with things that you see in the news, in a book, on social media, and so much more. The more that we can actually practice our empathy, the deeper we'll be able to connect. Empathy is truly one of the most remarkable powers that we have as humans. It's the ability to change our lives and the world around us. But in order for its power to actually reach every horizon on Earth, we have to be intentional about using it instead of just assuming it. Every part of this model comes together to create an active practice that will help you understand the world in a deeper sense. In fact, the person sitting next to you right now has probably lived through millions of experiences that you haven't even been able to imagine. But in order to truly learn from their stories, we have to be able to connect with our most profound sense of empathy. Learning about my family's history was a really big start for me, but I hope that this talk could be a start for you. Because empathy doesn't just matter right now more than anything because of ongoing turmoil in the world. It will matter 100 years from now and 100 more after that. It's the one thing that can link us no matter who we are or what we know. It exists beyond all natural laws and can truly help the world become a more understanding place. But getting there is something that we must do together. Thank you.